The demand for tigers comes from China, and there are all these routes that it's not here in India as such. And we're not obsessed by tiger bones or tiger teeth or whatever. And they'll pretty much eat anything that they see. That I know I've heard they eat fish as well. Those mud skippers, monkeys, and yes, if they see a human in their territory, again for them it's just another prey. So they just go for it. There was a tiger, Ustad T24, who killed a forest guard. But at the same time, I wanted people to understand you can't only think of that particular tiger, you have to think of the entire ecosystem. She used to fight with crocodiles and her tooth got broken. So she lived till, I think, she was the longest living tiger in the wild.
Hi, in today's episode, we have with us Gargi Rawat, a seasoned news anchor and environment reporter recognized for her dedication to wildlife and environmental journalism. In her debut novel, Tiger Season, she delves into the themes of media ethics, conservation, and the cultural richness of Rajasthan, examining how celebrity influence can shift focus onto crucial yet often sidelined issues. We are going to hear more from Gargi about this. Gargi's work reflects a commitment to raising awareness of ecological and societal challenge. Welcome, Gargi, in today's episode. And let's just start for the benefit of our audience. Can you tell us a little about your background, your journalistic journey, and of course, you're a recognized face, and what prompted you to focus on the environment and wildlife?
Right, thank you so much for having me on this podcast, and I've been looking forward to it. About my journey, I've been with NDTV now for over 20 years, nearly 25 years. And I was interested in environmental issues and wildlife since I was in school. I was in a boarding school in Dehradun at Welham Girls, and we used to, often go to the they used to take us for field trips. We used to go into national parks, into the mountains. My father's also in the forest service, so one has had a very close look. One has had visited many wildlife parks thanks to on holidays with parents. So I was always interested. College, however, I was at St. Stephen's. I did economics, and everybody in my class was pretty much headed to all these business schools and studying for their CAT, etc. So when that started in around the second or third year, I suddenly felt that corporate life didn't sound very exciting. I was just thinking, being in a cubicle and a bank or a company. It wasn't. I didn't think it was for me, and I thought maybe more creative. And since I've always loved wildlife, etc., I thought I could get into documentary filmmaking. And one thing led to another, and I applied to NDTV at that time, and I thought one could learn on the job, and one did learn a lot. And a few years into the job, when one was thinking, maybe now study further, I got an opportunity. We separated from Star News. I don't know how many of your viewers or listeners remember that NDTV was originally Star News. And we separated, and that's when NDTV 24/7 was started by Dr. Pranoy Roy. And then he gave me and my colleague, actually my mentor, Swati Tyagarajan, this chance to do a wildlife show in English. Swati did the English one called Born Wild, and I did Hindi, which was Safari India. And we got to travel all over the country to various tiger reserves, wildlife parks, various habitats, and really got to see the length and breadth of the country. So I think I'm very fortunate that NDTV decided to do that. It was the first of its kind show in the country, a wildlife show, the Swati, myself, and we always had usually a female camera person, so it was great fun. It was like this, all woman team traveling around the country, and one got to see a lot of the challenges when it came to conservation, the people involved, like the forest department or NGOs and activists. People are very passionate, who one doesn't often hear about, but very committed to the cause. So it was really great to see such things up close. And so I've been, as I said, very fortunate to be able to do this.
How amazing. I mean, it sounds like so much of fun, a whole women, led to go all around because it's like a sisterhood and one learns so much. Amazing. Totally envious. You've also authored the book Tiger Season, which largely deals into India's tiger conservation efforts over the past decades. What led you to pick this topic and any personal preferences that got you to contribute towards this extremely important topic? Being a Bengali, and also having loved Amitabh Ghosh's, Hungry Type. I went all the way there and, of course, I could not see the tiger, but one knows that there is also declining number there. And so tell me a little bit about what made you choose this absolutely grand animal.
Sure. And, speaking of Hungry Tide and the Sundarbans, I've had a chance to go there thrice. And once we were on a boat for 6, 7 days. Again, never seen the tiger, met people who've been attacked by a tiger, the fishermen, etc. And I think the closest we came to a tiger, I'm just sharing this because you mentioned Sundarbans, was we got off on an island with the forest department. And it was very, muddy, swampy. And we were walking towards some spot. And when we were returning, we got kind of stuck in the mud, and our camera person, she was like knee deep in the mud. And that's when the forest department pointed out very helpfully, the ranger was with us, oh look, there's a tiger pug mark. And we were knee deep in mud and we see this tiger pug mark. So that was quite scary. And like, okay, this time we don't want the tiger to come. But yes, it's a very it's not that easy to see the tiger in the Sundarban. And to add injury to this already. We're already feeling bad and salt to the wounds, as they say. The forest department showed us this clip recently. There was this group of Bengali journalists who had come, I think, a few months earlier just to cover the elections, and you know how it's done in these very remote areas. And so, just for a pleasure trip, they were taken on this boat. And one is, the video, you can hear them. Imagine like 15, 20 Bengali journalists, cacophony, a lot of noise. And suddenly like, oh, dekho, tiger, tiger. And there's a tiger happily swimming in the river. And they're making such a noise. And then this tiger gets onto this island and he, jumps there. And then he just looks back at them and then he bounds into the forest. And we're thinking, God, we, spend so much time traveling, trying to be very quiet, very, conscious about all that and mindful. And here's this boat full of very noisy journalists who just got to see a tiger. So that was very funny to see. So the tiger now, end of the day, when we think India, I think the tiger is one of our best, like yoga. It's one of our best sort of soft ambassadors. Like if we talk about the representing India, because all over the world there are children who will never see a tiger in the wild, who are so removed. They might maybe in Scandinavia and Canada, Europe, but if you ask them what's your favorite animal, they'll say tiger. And where does one find tigers? It's in India. So I wanted to, we did these campaigns as well at NDTV called Save Our Tiger campaign. And we did it over several years. And while, yes, it was around the tiger, we really, emphasized that tiger represents our forests. Under the, umbrella of the tiger, there's so many other animals that get protection thanks to tiger reserves. Project Tiger that was started in the 70s by late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. This real emphasis on conservation. So while again now there's a lot of soul searching that why we so tiger centric, let's face it, it's our best ambassador. And when we want to talk about conservation or forest, it's always best to do it through the tiger, and of course put the spotlight on other animals like the elephants, like leopards, and we also have, the gangetic dolphin. So all these animals represent, certain ecosystems, and the tiger is one animal that is found across the country, not like the lion that's only found in Gujarat, and that's a different story altogether, not being allowed to set up a separate sanctuary for them. But the tigers are found everywhere. So we did that campaign, and a lot of my experiences therefore inspired my book as well, which at the same time, I try to talk about various aspects of conservation in the country. Like we cannot forget tribals and their very unsung and untalked about contribution, which was not even a voluntary contribution because they were moved out at the time that all these sanctuaries were set up. And now, of course, we have a very good compensation program, which again, one which I talk about in my book, and which one needs to be there because you can't just move people out and not give them compensation. So over the years, it's evolved thanks to activists, thanks to media, and so through my book, I wanted to, in a fun way, through romance and adventure, just also softly touch upon these topics to make people think about it.
How wonderful, how wonderful. So what are you trying to convey, from the topic tiger season? What is the subtext of season in the context of the book?
Yes, because it's very difficult to find, a title that it had to have tiger in it because I thought that was very attractive again. And season because it's especially in the north, our parks open for a particular season, and where and they open usually after the monsoon. They close for the monsoon, so there's a lot of flooding, there's a lot of rain, and just and the animals breed, etc. And then October onwards, usually parks open, and then they're on till around June. So everybody always asks, what is the best time to see a tiger? So, taking from that, I just called it tiger season. And just to make it a sort of fun thing, which also brought in, the aspect of the book.
So, you must have done a lot of research. You must have, like, which are the kind of areas that you focused on in your book while you wrote this? Did you go into the forest? Did you go and stay in a tiger conservation place? How was the entire research process, Gargi?
So, as I mentioned, over the years, one has been very lucky and got to visit so many tiger parks and seen, various aspects of conservation in different parts of the country, in Bandhavgarh, in Madhya Pradesh, or Ranthambore in Rajasthan, Corbett in Uttarakhand. One has come down to Kabini and, visited parks there as well. So, the struggle of the forest guards, one has seen up close how they go around the park with just a stick, and then they're monitoring, and they have to look into so many different aspects as well as take care of themselves. So all this one had seen already. So in a way, I was lucky. A lot of my research was already done. And of course, a little bit reading up here and there, which one has already done in the course of reporting for so many years on these issues. Uh, there was an episode that happened, because I talk about man animal conflict, and somehow I feel that is something that in India we need to be more conscious of, and also figure out how to handle better and not just react every time there's an episode happens, but be ready for it and also be very sensitive to it. Because what happened in Ranthambore was there was a tiger, Ustad T24, who killed a forest guard, and it led to a huge hue and cry, and the forest department quickly shifted this tiger out from Ranthambore, which led to a lot of outrage. But also that same tiger, this was, I think, his fourth kill. So two had happened earlier of villagers, and it was at night, and they were in the park. So one, but before that, there was another forest official who was killed, who was in charge of some project in the forest, and he was crossing something, and he came face to face, and the tiger attacked. And so that, okay, people kind of try to say, no, no, it wasn't his fault and all. But then now this fourth episode has happened of a again a forest guard who just went towards some brush area, bushy area to. And usually tigers avoid humans. It's they hear you, they just, and they call gentlemen of the forest, and they. But somehow Ustad, I think there are a lot of theories, and it's very controversial. I don't want to get into it, but he just came out and attacked this guard and killed him and sat on him, like. So so there was a need to remove that tiger, and that was very controversial because the locals didn't like him at all, because he used to come out a lot. Now, come out what? Tigers don't recognize those boundaries, right? He used to sit on the road. He'd sometimes chase a motorcycle. He'd come into the villages. He'd kill cattle. So lots of things, and to have a tiger who wasn't necessarily scared of humans and would chase, etc., was very difficult for the forest department, because Ranthambore also has a temple up in the fort, and every Wednesday or Thursday you have all these pilgrims who walk across uh, in the outer buffer area of the park, but it is a tiger territory. So, given all that, they shifted Ustad, and that led to, even in Bangalore, you had candlelight vigils for him, and all that. It was really nice to see so much love for the tiger. But at the same time, I wanted people to understand you can't only think of that particular tiger, you have to think of the entire ecosystem, you have to think of the villager, you have to think forest department, you have to think of the other tigers, because if they let Ustad stay, and God forbid he did kill a pilgrim, again, the forest department would have had a huge controversy on their hands. At the same time, if villagers are angry with a particular tiger, there are other innocent tigers who they may also, target this one tiger. So you can't just humanize this one tiger and make him into a larger than life star of Ranthambore, and not think of everything else. And every conservationist, from Dr. Ulas Karan to Valmik Thapar, Anish Andheriya, all of them said the forest department did the right thing of moving this tiger out. but it became a really huge controversy. And NDTV, we also reported it in a very balanced way. And a lot of us also got targeted for our reportage during that time. So it was, quite something. So I've kind of brought those aspects out in my book as well of man animal conflict and how one has to look at the entire ecosystem and not just focus on one aspect and just be so, just to sit in our drawing rooms and say, no, no, but this poor tiger and what are we doing? We have to think of the others who live in that area as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So tigers have been a very pivotal part, of India's wildlife, which was once on the verge of extinction due to poaching. And we know about, the poaching that was so rampant in the past, right? Now, as an expert on this subject, do you really think that we're out of the woods right now? Or is there still a threat, to tigers as far as poachers is concerned?
So, you know, in the 70s, when poaching was allowed earlier on, before the Wildlife Act came in and all that, then our tiger numbers had really depleted and reached a very, low number at the time because of indiscriminate poaching that was going on. And thanks to then, various activists all approaching Indira Gandhi and, emphasizing the need for conservation is when we saw the whole story turn around and, the conservation started taking place and Project Tiger and tiger reserves were set up. And then again, we saw poaching taking place, like I'd say a few decades ago when and the demand for tigers comes from China. And there are all these routes that it's not here in India as such. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of royals or stwal royals, they have their khandani, tiger skins, etc. But there's no such demand. We're not obsessed by tiger bones or tiger teeth or whatever. Maybe you have those little chains, but there's no great demand as such. And all the tiger parts, there are these routes that they go into China through Tibet, and not just China, also, East Asia, where these parts are, in great demand, and they have all these supposed medicinal qualities, etc. So there was a time earlier where we saw a lot of demand taking place for tiger parts, and but since then there's been a lot of effort, a very, combined effort because the forest department couldn't do it alone. You also needed the police's help and administration's help, and there's certain tribes that were used for the poaching, so there was a little bit of emphasis there. There was schools set up for their children so they don't necessarily go into that, and these are traditionally they've been doing it. So yes, we need again a concentrated effort to divert them into other areas. So right now I think I have not, there are a lot of NGOs also working on this. So one has just seen tiger numbers going up, but there is a concern that some tigers, when they move out in many of these successful parks to other areas looking for other territories, that's the time when some of them do get killed. There is, now and then you keep seeing leopard skin, tiger skins getting caught here and there. But I have to say, I think there's been a lot of effort on that aspect. Even, for example, in Tibet, there used to be this tradition of having a tiger skin, or the monk sitting on tiger skin. That was also done away with. The Dalai Lama was also, I think he spoke on it and was told that don't have that tiger skin in the background, etc. So all these things have really helped create a lot of awareness around this.
So, humans continue to encroach the forest, and there are enough and more examples of human animal conflict, right? So, what can communities really do to improve, this delicate balance of relationship, and how can conservationists really help in putting this together?
So, I think if people want to be more involved with this whole issue, they can just be more aware. Also, I know a lot of people love going to tiger parks, love going for safaris to various parks, and not again be tiger centric. You can just appreciate the entire park as well. There's so much bird wealth, other animals, that we have vegetation as well. So that's always good for people to be just a little aware of all these other parts of the park, not just the tiger. And there are various NGOs that work very hard in the south. You have different NGOs, in the north you'll have different ones, people who work in particular areas. So you can read up more about them, donate to them, help them in their and what they're doing. And again, you just be aware, don't get just caught up if the next time, God forbid, there is some man animal conflict. Try to understand all the different aspects that are involved in this. And again, I think these days when we talk about animals and tigers, etc., it's thanks to this emphasis on tigers and other animals that we have such a wealth of forests and vegetation. And now when we talk about climate change and pollution and etc., all these things, it's the forests that actually protect us, as we know now. And it's not like climate change happening somewhere in a distance. It's literally happening. We're seeing it each and every day. And we spoke about the Sundarbans, and thanks to the protection the Sundarbans have, that hurricanes and I mean cyclones, etc., the impact is less. It doesn't reach Kolkata because of the Sundarbans that are there as a buffer. And similarly, in Mumbai, that's another aspect that is spoken about. So when we talk about saving animals, it's saving forests, it's saving ourselves as well. And a lot of our tiger forests and other forests are give rise to so many rivers. It's our water comes from there as well. So it's something that we should all be very mindful and conscious of. And it's not just tigers for the sake of tigers or looking at them, which should also be one part, but also the fact that so much else gets saved thanks to our push to conserve certain animals.
Yeah, absolutely. So India is home, to some very, very famous tigers. I'm a Bengali, so all my life I've heard about the Royal Bengal tiger, which is a very lethal animal. And so, as a part of your research, did any specific tiger really catch your attention, and what impression did it create for you personally, Gargi?
So, I mean, you're speaking about the Sundarbans, and I know the tigers there have this very ferocious sort of, impression or talk around them, or that's what it's said, that the man-eating tigers of Sundarbans. But not so much that as the terrain of the Sundarbans, because they you have these islands, you have the river, you have very sparse, you don't have as much prey base for the tigers there. So the tigers there, they're much leaner because of all the swimming they do. And they'll pretty much eat anything that they see. That I know, I've heard they eat fish as well, those mud skippers, monkeys. And yes, if they see a human in their territory, again, for them, it's just another prey. So they just go for it. Unlike tigers, perhaps in other parts in central India, that have a huge prey base, and they go and they have all their deer, etc. And humans, they usually only see in jeeps who come in safari, so they have that jeep image, and they don't bother much about them. So the Sundarban tigers get this bad rap of being man eaters, whereas they're just surviving over there, and given the terrain that they live in. But yes, there have been tigers that have become very famous in India in the past. You had this tiger B2 in Bandhavgarh, who was very famous and legendary at the time. And at the same time, his contemporary was Machli in Ranthambore, and she was a very famous tigress as well, and one of the most photographed, because her territory was around the lake, and she was called Lady of the Lake, and a lot of tourists used to see her and photograph her, and BBC, Nat Geo, etc., all made documentaries around her. And you had these tigresses. Then you had Collar Wali from Panna, who was very famous. uh, Panna Pench, I think it was. Uh, so there have been these tigers that have become very famous. There's one Sharmili from Corbett that one keeps hearing about. But the forest department tries to, at least in Ranthambore and in Madhya Pradesh, they've been trying to not name the tigers, because then all these, they become larger than life. So they have these numbers, but invariably some guide, some tourist will name a tiger, and then that name sticks, and it becomes a lore and legend of that particular park. So yes, there have been these very famous tigers. And I remember there was one time that they tried to put a price on them, in the sense they're saying Machli is worth this much, because she became one of the most famous tigresses. So people used to come to Ranthambore especially to view her, and because of those photographs, a lot of what do you call publicity also it took place. And a lot of people wanted to go for tiger safaris because of these beautiful photographs that they'd see. So time and time again, you have these, famous tigers that emerge. So in fact, I've got a version of Machli in my book, a tigress that is very famous, because Machli lived to a very grand old age, like 19, 20. I can't remember because nobody specifically knows her age, but it was also, she disappeared. She got chased out of her territory by her daughters who were equally fierce. And the forest department also helped her along. This is something they wouldn't admit, but at the same time, she got this status almost of like a devi of the park or something. So people, there would be goats that were left for her when they knew that she hadn't eaten for a long time because her tooth was broken. She used to fight with crocodiles and her tooth got broken. So she lived till, I think, she was the longest living tiger in the wild. Otherwise, no, tigers usually live till they're 14 or 15 if they're lucky. But she lived till she was 18 or 19.
How amazing is that, Gargi? Wow. Fantastic. I'm already, in love with Machli. Listening to you, yeah. With growing tourism, cultivation, and local economy charters, the delicate balance between animals and humans is always under stress. So, can you share your perspective on how tourism and local economy can be built sustainably? Because sustainability is really now the need of the hour. What can we do?
That's right. And again, as I said, this is something the forest department can't do alone. Like tourism is very helpful because it creates, you have more eyes on the park, and that's what one needs. That constantly, looking at what's happening inside the park. And if we say, and people, talk about, oh, but you see those, pictures of jeeps lined up and there's one tiger sitting there and people feel very bad. But these tigers are pretty much, and people have to be very mindful. You have to leave gaps so the tiger can walk across, otherwise they don't bother. And as I said, you have to keep very quiet. And uh, and when we see those pictures, those are from parks that are very successful. They have a huge number of tigers, thankfully, like Ranthambore, like Bandhavgarh, Kanha, whatever. All these parks have huge number of tigers, a lot of tourists, and they're doing very well. It's the parks that don't have tourists, where you don't know anything that's happening, is the worry. Because those are the, and if you had more tourists there, you'd know what was happening. We went for a shoot, I remember, to one a park in Bihar, Valmiki, and it's a tiger park. And we were driving our jeep and we didn't see any deer or anything that we're used to seeing in a Kana or a Ranthambore or Bandhavgarh. And then finally we saw one stag, and it looked at us. I got so scared and it just dashed off, and we could hear it running for at least a few kilometers. Like, it was just running. Now, I mean, one of the things that conservationists say, that the reason for such a reaction is that there's hunting going on there, and that local, maybe it may be just for consumption, etc. But clearly that's the reason the animals are so skittish and scared of humans. Whereas other parks, these parks where you talk about, oh, too many jeeps, too many, animals don't bother, because never been any danger as such. So tourism is very helpful. Yes, we have to ensure that all the hotels and lodges that mushroom around, certain rules have to be there. And again, this is where the local administration has to work with the forest department, because the forest department's you know their power is after the boundary of the park. They don't have that power to allow or disallow for lodges and hotels. And that's where the local administration has to make sure that you don't open up hotels that become shadi destinations, wedding destinations, or rain dance destinations. They have to be very mindful of where they are, and the reason why they're there. And yes, not pollute, not create a lot of garbage, and the water consumption, also do rainwater harvesting, etc., etc. There are many rules. In fact, we had done a whole story around Corbett, about the parks there, because about the park there, and about how the hotels there had started to do all these things of wedding destinations, rain dance, all kinds of wild parties, etc. Because they're only again, the forest department has restricted the number of jeeps in all various zones of parks, so just to attract more tourists. But I think after we did the report, then the local administration, there was a rule about noise levels in the park, and it was not allowed. You could not make noise, none of the hotels, otherwise you'd get fined and all. I think it brought that down. And Corbett was very successful early on, and that time one wasn't so aware of you know uh, the areas around the park, and that's why a lot of these lodges mushroom. But I think now we've learned from mistakes. One has to be more careful, make sure the tourism is there and it provides for the local economy. Hotels should hire from the locals, from the villagers, etc. Provide their drivers, their guides, their people who work in hotels. So all this should be something that benefits the locals, so they feel proud that they have a park there. It shouldn't be that they feel that because of this we're not allowed to do all sorts of other activities, or animals coming into their fields, etc. So all this, again, NGOs help here, civil activists help here, and forest department, if everybody can just work together to be more mindful of this and make tourism a really positive thing.
So, Gargi, while you chronicling, this entire wildlife and discovering all of this, at a personal level, how has it impacted you?
At personal level, I think I've been very fortunate. So one is always very grateful that one got an opportunity to do and see as much as one has seen. And I hope to see a lot more and continue visiting these parks. And, and since I report on environment, and right now in Delhi, we're having this huge pollution crisis, one knows how everything is interlinked, and how no, there's no just one action. It has to be an entire action when it comes to conservation and protecting ourselves. So it influences me in terms of, again, just very conscious of India, with wealth that we have, also the kind of development that we need done. So these always things I think about when we say your GDP is this, or we need this, etc. One should also be mindful of what kind of development, and what and how to protect the resources that we have, and just be very aware when we say, oh, we want broader roads, or we want the distance between here and there to become less, or the roads to be better. Just be aware, are they going through forests, are they going, so maybe it takes an hour extra, maybe but not be so just realize that everything can't be very fast. I think in the south also there are various highways that you have which are going through Nagarhole and various other parks, and you want to be conscious of that. And and thanks to a lot of the media and activists, in fact, now on some of the national highways, like in Maharashtra, you have and this highway where they made flyover so that animals could cross underneath, and it did cost a lot more, but I think that is a cost which is well worth it. So all these things one is very conscious of.
Fantastic. What are your next endeavors, as an advocate and wildlife conservationist? So, what is it that you'd like to pursue?
Yeah, well, I hope to make more documentaries, and hopefully NDTV will support that, and we will make more documentaries and programming around this. I hope to write another book as well, maybe around these themes. And I feel the journey of my protagonists in Tiger Season could, and people want to know more what happens after that. So maybe another book, continuing the journey, onwards, and looking at other parts of the country and other challenges and other animals as well, maybe.
How amazing. Lastly, what would you like to say, young wildlife enthusiasts and upcoming conservationists who can take, what is it that they can take away from your book? And any advice that you would like to give them, when they are starting to write on wildlife in India?
Well, I hope more people do, because I think, again, it's something that we need to be very grateful for, and also, something that we need to protect. So I hope more people do join journalism, or speak about wildlife, or write about wildlife and conservation, and also understand, like I said, that sometimes things get very sensationalized, but we need to be very balanced. And so be very aware of all those aspects as well when you write about it. And of course, always be aware. Um, Unfortunately, animals don't have a vote. So when it comes to elections, it's not a big issue. And in fact, it's employment that is more of an issue. So, so around various tiger parks, reserves, and, that's always one of the tussles that one sees, that about providing employment or keeping farmers happy. So while one has to keep that in mind as well, but remember to always, champion the cause of the animals, of tigers, of wildlife, and our forests.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gargi, for being on today's episode. And for all our listeners and our viewers, the book is Tiger Season by Gargi Rawat. Please pick it up and you will be, yes. Would you like to read a small part from the book, Gargi?
Well, I didn't intend to, but
There's something very,
well, the tiger. I said that I have a tiger based on Machli, and in my book I call her Malika, and I talk about uh, about this journey to try to see a tiger, and they're on a safari, and they can, hear a call, which is a warning that the tiger is in the on the move. So we said, so here I'll read one part of it. As we settled in to wait, another call caught our attention, raising our hopes of a sighting. The minutes ticked by, increasing our anticipation as we scanned the underbush for any sign of a tiger. Suddenly, a rustling in the bushes ahead caught our eye. We continued watching, and soon a face peered out, its black and orange stripes stark against the lush greenery. The white circles on its ears stood out as it cautiously surveyed the area. Yes, finally, there it was. Vikram excitedly squeezed my hand as I grinned back at him. I looked to the other jeep and saw Jaya and Danish hard at work, capturing the moment. They're the camera people. Then the tiger's body emerged slowly, as it were taking its time to fully appear. It paused for a moment, flicking its flicking tail still in the underbush as the rest of it stood on the edge of the grassland, and then gracefully padded out towards the lake. I recognized her regal air and slightly frail physique. Is that Malika? I asked excitedly. Having seen her a few months ago, I could identify her. She was thinner, slightly smaller than some of the other tigers in the park. Dev Raj, who now had his camera ready, looked back, giving me a wide smile and nodded. She's the very famous one, isn't she? Vikram whispered. Yes, she is, I replied. Even though she looked old, there was something very grand about her. This was the area she had lorded over for years, but now she looked around a little warily in case any of her younger lot were around to challenge her. Oh, Malika, you beauty, I heard Devraj say softly as he continued clicking pictures on his camera.
Oh my God, I traveled with you. Fantastic, so beautiful. Amazing. Wish you luck, Gargi, and many more books. And thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you. Thank you.